Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine, just for a second, dedicating 2 whole decades of your life, starting when you were literally 8 years old, to completely rewiring your own brain. And we're not talking about a university study or reading some textbooks here. We're talking about a deeply personal, highly structured internal operating system. Today's explainer takes us inside this fascinating multi-decade mind project known as strategic cognitive science. What we're looking at is the master blueprint of the entire framework we're about to unpack. I know, it looks incredibly complex, right? But that's just because the scope of this project is absolutely immense. It's a deeply detailed architectural map of one single person's cognition, meticulously built up over 20 years. It maps out how internal strategy, cognitive design, and real-world action all interlock. Don't worry if it looks like a giant puzzle right now. We're going to break down exactly what all of this means and how it works in plain, simple English. To make sense of this massive manifesto, we're going to follow a really clear path today. First up, a 20-year mind project. Second, the core Borromean structure. Third, unique cognitive hacking techniques. And finally, entering the real world. So let's start right at the beginning with Section 1, a 20-year mind project. Right off the bat, we need to clarify what we actually mean by strategic cognitive science in this context, because this is not your traditional academic discipline taught in some university lecture hall. Instead, it's a highly customized, personal strategic system. The creator literally treated their own cognition, their nervous system, and even their personality as targets for intentional optimization. Think of it kind of like coding a bespoke operating system, but instead of writing it for a computer, it's written for a human life. Now, what's really interesting about this is the profound catalyst behind the whole system. At just 8 years old, the creator had this striking realization. They felt they could actually do anything, but they also recognized a pretty harsh truth about the world. Society only evaluates your external results, not your brilliant internal strategy. So instead of trying to prove themselves to the world right then and there, this 8-year-old turned their entire strategy completely inward. And that single decision kicked off a massive timeline. Age 8 marked the start of the project. Then, from age 8 all the way up to 27, they were completely locked into a learning and research phase, essentially building an internal laboratory in their mind. I mean, have you ever spent even a few months trying to build a single new habit? Imagine doing that for 19 years in secret. Then, ages 26 to 28 became a release and integration phase, where they started dismantling that lab. And from 29 onwards, it's been the real-world execution phase. The sheer dedication required to sustain a hidden internal project for this long is just mind-boggling. All right, let's move on to Section 2, the core Borromean structure, to see how this internal lab was actually built. The architecture of this whole project relies on 3 independent but fluidly combining elements. First up is strategy, which is simply the act of thinking, designing, and improving plans to hit your goals. Next is cognitive design, which means intentionally optimizing your own thoughts, nerves, and personality to serve those plans. And finally, action, which is the physical execution in reality that reflects your strategy. What makes this structure so unique is that there's no set hierarchy here. Any element can exist totally on its own, or combine freely with the others depending on whatever the situation demands. And this brilliantly illustrates a two-way metastructure. It's not just a one-way street. On one side, we have brain to reality, which is improving the brain to intentionally alter the outside world. But on the flip side, we have reality to brain, using real-world actions to feed back into and physically influence your own neural development. So, internal changes create external actions, and those external actions literally rewire the internal brain. It's a continuous self-optimizing loop. But you might be wondering, what was the ultimate goal of all this internal rewiring? Well, the goal was to become the ultimate strategist. Crucially, though, this doesn't mean becoming a know-it-all who masters every single skill on Earth. Actually, scratch that. It's more like becoming an orchestrator. A strategist in this system is someone who can understand different fields, connect the right experts, and ultimately make the final critical decisions. It's an incredibly leveraged way of interacting with the world. This brings us to my favorite part, Section 3, unique cognitive hacking techniques. During that 20-year learning phase we talked about, the creator built an internal brain think tank featuring a suite of almost sci-fi-sounding psychological hacks. We're talking about weakness design, maintenance circuits, narcissist circuits, and general language and learning circuits. And these weren't just isolated party tricks. They were utilized in combination to sustain a massive internal research environment completely hidden from the outside world. One of the most striking concepts here is doublethink. The creator literally divided their personality into two distinct roles. One side held the grand 20-year strategic plan, while the other side was intentionally kept entirely in the dark so they could just live daily life without the heavy burden of that massive agenda. Think about how difficult it is to keep a secret from your friends. Now imagine keeping a massive secret from your own active consciousness. It allowed them to execute blind planning, living seemingly normally on the outside, while a deeply structured strategy operated quietly in the background. We also see two other fascinating hacks: the narcissist circuit and weakness design. By name alone, these kinda sound like vanity or laziness, but they were actually highly practical tools. The narcissist circuit involved creating an alternate internal voice specifically to praise the self, essentially building a neural reward system to make grueling, long-term learning actually feel good. Meanwhile, weakness design meant intentionally delaying the correction of outward visible flaws. By letting society think they were weak in common areas, the creator freed up massive mental resources to focus entirely on their hidden, long-term priorities. So, what does this all mean? Did these abstract theories actually produce tangible outcomes? The short answer is yes, absolutely. During a really rigorous 40 Tokyo coding exam, the creator experienced a hologram metacognitive state, literally visualizing the entire code structure flowing naturally from above. They also noted unintended, but highly welcomed, physical improvements in their reflexes. And surprisingly, by using a technique they called brain deep learning, they effectively hacked their own social skills to build strong friendships in a French language circle. So the internal lab definitely yielded highly unique, measurable results. Let's move to our final section and see how this builds. Section 4, entering the real world. Between the ages of 26 and 28, the creator hit what they called the integration phase. To actually function fully in society, the internal laboratory had to be carefully shut down. Survival mechanisms like that doublethink we discussed were officially terminated. The fragmented, optimized parts of their mind were merged back together. The experiment was over. The personality was finally unified into a single cohesive strategist. But when you contrast their past with their present, the shift is pretty jarring, though incredibly relatable. In the past, they had these lofty, abstract, almost superhero-like goals, building an internal brain think tank and engineering complex neural architecture. But the present real-world execution? Well, the priorities right now are studying for IT certifications, job hunting, and building stress tolerance. After 2 decades of mental mastery, the creator is now facing the exact same grounded, everyday societal hurdles as the rest of us. They're finally putting the machine to work. Which leads to perhaps the most surprising piece of self-reflection in the entire source material. When asked what message they would give their 8-year-old self, the creator said they would tell themselves not to start this project. No way. They realized that society ultimately demands real-world execution and tangible output, not internal perfection. You can have the most optimized brain on the planet, but if you don't actually produce results in the real world, the strategy remains entirely incomplete. It's a profound conclusion to an absolutely incredible 20-year journey, which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. If you had spent 20 years perfecting your own internal operating system, optimizing every single nerve, habit, and thought, how would you apply it to the real world today? Would you stay comfortable in the lab, or would you step out and execute? Think about what your own strategy is pointing towards right now. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.